The rotation in your shoulder and more important, your forearm, so important in terms of being able to put your power down through the hand, and the strength in the wrist is so key to that as well. It's really interesting. I could definitely geek out with you about the importance of rotational control and range in the forearm, and then the shoulder. For me, it's in that order, for your hand to work properly and to be able to put your power down through certain parts of the hand, particularly the front two. That's really important. But,
I don't know. No, say more. I want to hear more about that. Welcome to the Testpiece podcast. This podcast is about all things high-level climbing. How to go from good to great. I'm your host, Joshua Horsley. I've been climbing for over 30 years. We recently updated our Patreon, and now you get exclusive content from the guests that you love. You get your episodes before everyone else, and they're ad-free. Try it out now at patreon.com/testpiece with a free 7-day trial. Okay, let's start the show. Paul Houghoughi, Paul Huffy. That sounds probably simpler from me. Welcome to the pod, man. Thanks for coming on and making time. I know it's the evening over there. I love that technology lets me talk to you over the pond. But yeah, thanks for taking time out of dinner and bedtime and that routine with your kids. Although maybe, actually, I take it back. Sometimes I'm happy when I'm able to duck out from the bedtime routine.
Yeah. We'll hear if it's going well or not, because the kids' bedrooms are directly below us. So let's see how this goes.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, you are a popular and accomplished physio in climbing. I like that you snagged that name on Instagram, the Climbing Physio. You must have gotten that pretty early. You've worked with some of the top athletes in the world. You are the official physio for the Great British Climbing Team. And that means you even accompanied them to the Olympics, which sounds absolutely incredible. Congrats on that, Paul. I think that's really special, man.
Yeah, definitely right place, right time. And you're just watching it evolve and then reflecting afterwards and seeing it for what it is. But in real time, it's just a big old steamroller that you kind of just get on and get off. And then it's, what the heck was that all about? And I've done 2 of them.
So humble. Oh yeah, 2 of them. Gosh, literally every single Olympics that climbing has been in. Okay, cool. I also just want to point out that you are an extremely accomplished climber yourself. You've FA'd double-digit boulders on almost every continent in the world. And that's not mandatory. You don't have to be a top climber to help top climbers. But I do think it provides a perspective that can only help. And I also think it can sometimes make you appreciate those top athletes even more. Like you're like, wow, like I've put my whole life into this. I'm pretty good. And how are you so much better than me?
Yeah. Definitely seeing that more and more as I get a bit older and the standard of the sport gets better. It's like both things go in the opposite direction at the same time. So I can really appreciate what you're saying there, for sure. We're both pretty motivated, aren't we? Like we're both refusing to slow down and psyched to still be as strong as possible. So I think we've got that in common, actually. Yes.
I keep catching myself saying something about being old or talking about that and being negative about it. And I'm trying to banish that thinking, because it's almost like you're already giving up before you've even started. And what do they say? Age is just a number. If you didn't know how old you were, you would just wake up and feel the way you feel and just let it roll. And I like just cutting off that negative talk right away.
That's something as a blueprint yet to, compare ourselves to. Think if you're someone who doesn't do exercise and hasn't exercised your entire life, then there's probably some sort of standard opinion on what happens as you get older based on everyone around you who's also not super, super psyched on something, But if you are super psyched on something, then I just don't think there's a ceiling on what we're doing. It's just too new. And yeah, I'm totally with you. I've got no excuses other than the ones I create, which I think a month later are gone because I've kind of realized they weren't right. So you've got to keep an open mind, haven't you?
Yeah. And luckily we even do have people who kept an open mind and then blazed a trail and are climbing extremely well into their 40s and their 50s. Some of them have been on this podcast. And so, it just makes you say to yourself, okay, no, really, who knows what the limit is? And something that I hope we get into, we never know, the podcast goes where it goes, is this idea of, we've seen climbing competition, these top athletes that you're working with and seeing the Olympics become quite young. And I think it's easy to intuit from that, oh, that means that we are best when we're young, but that may not actually be the case. That may have more to do with competitions and the evolution, and the quick evolution we've seen in competitions, rather than some kind of truth about age and physiology and the maximal limits of our sport at whatever age it is.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it quite like that, because you're right. There's much greater access to facilities, and kids are starting climbing thinking, the way tomorrow's moving is normal. Whereas 3 or 4 years ago, that just was completely new. And there were people with 20 years experience looking at that and learning it for the first time. So yeah, who's to say that those guys now aren't going to bring that experience 10 years in down the line and sustain those improvements above with the experience and the ability to move. I've never thought about it like that, but you're right. It's too easy just to assume that it's just getting younger and that's how it is. Yeah.
And I actually want to point out that I think that has been a consistent theme I'll just go back to when I started climbing about 30 years ago, and I came out of gymnastics. I was really jumpy. We didn't really have coaching in climbing back then. So there wasn't like you must do it like this, Josh. It was just good luck out there. I was very dynamic. And during that era, it was very focused on French sport climbing, and people were very 3 points on, very, very drop knee, very static. And actually Chris Sharma was very dynamic, and I thought that was cool. I wanted to be like that. It looked cool, and it made me, I think, seem good at the time. But now, being dynamic and jumping around, even in not the Cordo sense of extreme competition boulders, but just kind of, I don't know, normal gym climbing is often more dynamic. And so what made me kind of special as a youth is now just like, oh, of course you jump. It's just dynamic. Who cares?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Paul, before we get on even deeper in our chat, I wanted to share a little anecdote that I thought was super cool. Not such a secret, but the behind the scenes is often we chat before, figure out some topics about, I don't know, what would be most fun for us to talk about. And, as we were chatting, having fun, I said something like, oh, yeah, I got a little finger injury that I was dealing with. And you're like, oh, tell me more. Like, I want to hear. I said, no, Paul, I'm not here to be your patient. I don't want to make you put that hat on right now. I'm not asking you to treat me. But you pestered me a little bit, and I, said, okay, here's what's going on. But what really stood out to me is you just lit up, Paul. Like, you had so much fun diagnosing me, and giving me some tips on how I might rehab it. And, I thought we were having fun before, just talking about climbing and topics, but you actually lit up even more, I felt like, when we kind of went into that. And I just thought it was cool that you deeply, deeply enjoy your work and helping others. And not surprised you've had so much success doing it.
Oh, yeah, thanks. It's I cannot switch off from it. I don't want to either. I think the time I'm not my inquisitive nature, the time that goes is probably the time I'd do something different. I think because it really doesn't feel like work. The only time it feels like work is when I'm doing too much volume of it and I'm not getting quite enough time for myself. But besides that, which I'm doing a much better job of managing, I'm just all about it. And I decided that from a really early stage in my physio career, because when you climb and you're a physio, you've got two options. You either say, I'm not at work now. I'm climbing. This is my time. And you have to just keep on saying that. Or you do the other. You can't be in the middle, because if you help someone 1 week and then you give them the hard line of I'm climbing now, then that's mixed messaging. That's not fair either. So I decided, let's just be fully open to this profession. Let's always try and learn and be really open to it. And I think that's really helped me, because people throw things at you in circumstances where it's not ideal, and you've got to think on your feet, and you see things you'd never normally see as well. And I think just people being able to access you like that works for them. And if I'm always learning, then I'm getting something out of it. And so far it's sustainable, but maybe I need to curtail it a little bit. Who knows? We'll find out.
I don't know. I like that idea of just being, I don't want to say it's not being all in all the time. It's that you just enjoy what you do. And so why do you want to try to separate it? And it's hard to do. It's hard to find something you love. And oftentimes it sounds like you found it relatively young in your life, but if you're sitting out there and you're 22 and you're like, well, I don't really know what I would want to spend time on all day. Well, keep going.
Exactly. You're a long time employed when you find your thing, but don't rush to get there. That's definitely something I'm instilling in my kids. Like, don't rush to get there. But it was my second degree physio, so I went into it like more like a vocation rather than a degree. But yeah, no, when I saw your finger, I was immediately interested, and I kept looking at it whilst you were chatting, and I was like, right, I've got to ask him about this. And you're really switched on. So in 5 minutes, you could give me a really succinct summary, and then that gave me a good insight into how switched on you were with it. And then you think, well, what can I add to this? Because you don't need more noise when you've got something you're managing. So is there something I can add? And how do I add as much as possible with as few exercises, or get in and out there and see how it lands? I think that's kind of the way to do it. I think we managed it, didn't we?
We did. I've been doing my exercises every day, even before we hopped on just now.
Beautiful. Well done.
Something I'm curious about is when I started, I don't know what I would call this journey, but when I learned more about the body, anatomy, kind of, I think it's an offshoot of whenever you get injured, or even if you're just training and trying to be the best that you can be, you want to really understand as much as you can. And then all of a sudden the world looked different to me. I'd see someone walking, I'd think, oh, like their gait is terrible. They look like they're too turned out in the, when their leg is an extension or something. You go into the climbing gym now and you go, ooh, like that's a terrible shoulder position for that move, or something like that.
No, do you know what? I don't. I switch off completely. And if you've seen me as someone for physio, I'll never ask you how it's going. I have a rule where unless someone brings something to me, I don't think about it, because I think a lot of people don't want to be reminded they've got an issue, perhaps when they're at the wall. And so I just switch off from it completely. And I find that's probably why I can then switch on if someone comes to me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You said something about they don't want to be reminded while they're climbing that they've got an issue. And this is actually one of the things that I think is hardest about injuries, is that I want to just pull on and be there, or it's almost like you're not there. You're almost just kind of letting your body do its thing. And when you feel something hurt, or you realize like, hey, like maybe this is a bad position for me, it takes you away from that moment. And it's not the pain, it's not even the not climbing, it's that lingering inability to just try hard and kind of disappear into the movement.
Yeah, it's really intrusive. You realize then it's quite fragile to hit a flow state. That's a delicate thing, isn't it? That I think a lot of us are trying to hit that, especially if you've got it once in a project and all you remember is brushing the holds, and then suddenly you're at the top, and whatever happens there would definitely get interrupted by injury. It'd be very hard to hit flow straight if that thing hits you.
So I was just about to hop in and ask you about the Olympics and what it was like being a physio there in the day to day, but something that it occurred to me as we were just talking about being injured, being in that flow state, is, do you remember Yanya on boulder number 4 at the Olympics? I was like, well, you're probably watching it. But I remember Yanya potentially sustaining an injury on one of her last tries on bouldering before going into the sport climbing round. I don't really know any behind the scenes. I saw her kind of pulling on her finger, looking at her finger. It perhaps got trapped in almost like a finger lock on one of the start moves. And, you weren't Yanya's coach. But I'm curious, when you deal with athletes that may be injured in mid competition, how do you assess that and help them work through both like the mental part and then letting it go away when, maybe a gold medal is on the line?
That's a really interesting one, because in the moment of injury, it's up to the athlete to signal to the official that they want help with the problem. And so there's been times where I've seen an athlete that I've been in the pit looking after injure themselves, and they've given me a look and given me a shake of the head, and the coach has lost their head about it, furious. And yeah, I know in that moment that athlete does not want help. They don't want to talk about the injury. They want to focus and understand it potentially, and we'll see what they're like on problem 2 or the next line and see where they're at. And perhaps then they'll call me in. So there is a sort of barrier to entry there, which, unless you kind of know about that, you wouldn't know everything that's going on there. But yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. You don't have a lot of time. And when you're there, you're not allowed to directly manipulate the athlete. You've got to do what you can to let them safely get out onto the field of play again. And in that moment, you could make the call that actually this is something that could go really badly. And then you've got to have a really honest conversation. And it's not very private. You've seen the isolation zones. When Yanya was pulling her finger, I was watching that as well. She was obviously injured and everyone could see it. So when you're having these conversations, everyone's just eating popcorn, listening to what's going on. So it's a really intense environment to make a judgment call and to communicate really kind of sensitively to someone who's very stressed. So there's a lot of skills required in that moment to make a call and things.
I think what's funny is probably one of the secrets of being an athlete is that even when they're injured, when they're on that big stage, they can probably just pull on and flow and not even worry about it. And then it's like, but is that the right call? And maybe when it's a gold medal, Olympic gold medal on the line, it is the right call. And it's kind of up to them, I guess.
I actually found Yanya's last 2 blocks and then the route absolutely fascinating, because I would say that she was not in a flow state for any of that. And you could see actually on the block after the one she injured her finger on, or maybe the next few moves after she tweaked her finger, she was swinging on one arm and she looked like someone who'd never climbed for a moment in time. And you could see she was really having to get herself together. I don't know if you remember that. She was swinging backwards and forwards and twisting on her shoulder. And I don't know, there's lots of things that probably went into that moment. The finger being sore, potentially the fact that the boulder was set so that lead climbers could get a good amount of points ahead of her, which I know she doesn't like when competition blocks are quite easy, because it means that then there's less of a difference. She likes a hard block. She likes to be challenged. And going into lead, her back was to the wall plus the finger, and yet still she smashed it. And to me, that is the sign of greatness on a world stage. When you've got the best nipping at your heels, ahead on points, you've got a finger injury, it's feeling ugly, but you still go out there and beat everyone. And I just think it's incredible. It was a really amazing win. I was fascinated watching her just before she came out. You could see in her face, she was really holding it together, just about. She had tears in her eyes, I think, at 1 or 2 points, but still won. That's how good she is.
Yeah, it's amazing too, because when the world gives you all the excuses that you need, which happens to us, it's like, well, you do have kids, you are getting older, maybe you didn't sleep well last night. Like, I know we're not talking about the Olympics, and it sounds like, it'd be easy if everything was on the alignments in the Olympics, but I disagree. I think that the world can hand you all sorts of excuses. And this is when, if you're great, or, whatever the word you want to use is, you still show up in the best way you can. You try to, smash those fears down. Oh, what good moment. Oh, I love the Olympics.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to watch these things, which is a shame. Accessibility is quite hard with this stuff. You don't get in the media, but if anyone does get the opportunity to watch it back, just watch her really closely, both during that block that you described, and then, when she's waiting to come out, and then see what she actually does. It's brilliant.
On this idea of getting an injury and moving forward and potentially still climbing, you said something along the lines of assessing whether it could be something really bad. And this just kind of, made my head go off into this idea of, it seems like sometimes when you've popped your pulley or something, that perhaps all the damage is done. And, I don't know. I wouldn't really think like that, because I have so much to lose where, if I get hurt, I really quickly hang up the towel now and say, yeah, not today. But yeah, what's that kind of thinking like, where it's like, this is an injury and it's already done, and, there's nothing we can do about it, versus, hey, this is an injury, but perhaps this could turn into something terrible, or even make it even worse by continuing to go on.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to the moment you're dealing with the problem in. So there's been times where after, say, qualifying for the Olympics, we've sat down around the table with the coaches and, performance director and everyone, and they're kind of talking about what's next. And I've had moments where I've said, none of that's next. This person is doing nothing because they need to be doing these basic things without pain. Forget about all this sort of performance. They need a break. And that's kind of being able to give that athlete room to breathe and making a call for them. And that's where you're kind of the bad guy, really. When it's pressurized, you have to just explain everything, the circumstances. If this happens, and let's say like Shauna's knee, when Shauna developed a meniscus tear a few days before competition, we had these conversations that were really unpleasant but necessary. A really tough conversation where we said, if you can't unlock your knee, if it does lock on speed, because that was the first event, and bear in mind she struggled to climb stairs, that morning, then, you can call a timeout. I'll try and unlock it. And if we can't unlock that knee and you can't stand on it, then we have to call it, and all of that have been out in the open, and still, to credit Shauna, she kind of just smashed it. Again, overcoming some adversity that most people will never know about. So yeah, it is tough. The sharp end of sport, making calls on injuries is really tough, and you can't please everyone. You've got to be the bad guy to someone on some level. But if you're doing it in the athlete's best interest, and you're communicating that really clearly, then you'll never look back and regret it. You'll always regret sitting on the fence and then something going wrong.
Gosh, yeah, I don't know if I'd want to be the bad guy there, but I do think it's important to just call it as you see it. And sometimes it still is the athlete's decision in the end. And something that when we were talking about my little finger thing, and you said something about me being keyed in or paying attention. And I always think that when I work with physios or coaches of any kind of thing, it's like, it's still on me. And so I want to hear the honest opinion. And then I can say, okay, like my knee might lock, and I understand. And I'm moving forward knowing that. And gosh, Shauna, friend of the pod, definitely have had Shauna on. She has had some really rough injuries, and she just keeps coming back. And I don't know. I think that makes her special, because I don't think people really realize what she's gone through, and then the hard work, and then the ability to then show up, try hard again, and put it all out there, which is, yeah, important if you want to win.
Yeah, definitely. They'll see her alongside a lot of the newer athletes, particularly like, say, a year before the Olympics actually started, actually 2 years, in Tokyo, where there was the Olympic qualifiers. She was on it, and she was like owning the boulder and everything else. And yet at that point, she had 2 decades worth of climbing under her belt. So she's 20 years old in the sport, started when she was 6. And she's trained really hard her whole life. So she's, old in sporting years, but still looks young and was still moving brilliantly, relative to someone who's been doing it for 6 years, and ramped up really quickly with all the facilities and everything else, developing the new style, which she had to turn her hand to. So all these things are a lot of stress on the body. And like you say, now she's outside, and she still climbs as well as anyone outside. I mean, some of the things she's done outside is just like, well, she's still world class. So yeah, it's brilliant.
That makes me wonder about something when you talk about this idea of kind of training age versus actual age. And something that I've noticed as I get older and older, and I've injured myself my fair share, maybe more, over the years. And I mentioned I've been climbing for 30 years, and I don't know if I've been training hard for 30 years, but I've been recklessly trying hard for 30 years. Something I've noticed is that it seems like in some ways, injuries never exactly go away. Even if you have rehabbed it, you don't have any pain, things are fine. Maybe that was 10 years ago. I find that somehow they're still part of my body and my movement in ways that maybe I didn't recognize, at the time. Like I'll have a finger injury, and then I'll be fine, and I'll climb and not even remember which finger it is. And then maybe years later, it kind of creeps back in, or I get injured nearby it, and I kind of wonder, like, was that related? And do you think that's an inevitable part of just the body still is, holding on to the trauma and it has to adjust to it in some way? Or is that just me rehabbing inappropriately or improperly, I should say. Improperly, not appropriately.
But I think there's patterns that definitely you want to look into, like the kind of cascade events where, like you say, your finger got sore and then the neighboring finger became painful and your wrist started hurting and it was all on the same side. And these sort of things happen with the lower limb as well. And they can be hard to see. So a runner with a problem with a left hip might develop a right ankle issue because they're landing heavily on it. And unpicking these things requires a lot of skill and zooming out. But I think, if you've injured yourself and structurally that thing is settled and you're maintaining your strength, it isn't uncommon to have intermittent sensitivity around those areas. But providing, you're moving well around it, your strength's good, your training's appropriate and all of that good stuff. I don't think there's any good reason why you need to carry these things through unless it's been catastrophic, which are actually quite rare. We've probably been injured more than most people listening to this, I would say. You've been climbing for what, 20 years?
30 plus now.
Yeah, so same. So we've got 60 years of climbing between us. That's a lot of doing things the wrong way and not knowing about it. And I've had injuries that were bad enough that if I just thought about the area, it would start hurting again. And, pain's weird. Like it's a physical experience, a physiological experience and a psychological response. And that can be really cyclical. And, I've had areas that have been really painful for years. Like I've had separated ribs and fractured them doing a different sport. And yeah, I can still think that area sore if I wanted to, which is really strange thing to say. But it's just because the area is really sensitive because it's been painful for ages, but it moves fine and it doesn't inhibit me at all. And I think as long as you've not got this cascade event happening, and you've nipped that in the bud and you understood it, I don't think there's any good reason for that, to be honest, I'd say.
That's good to hear. It's often areas that I hurt and then kind of didn't do much with, just kind of let them heal. And when I say let them heal, I mean climbed anyways and just tried to avoid that pain, which does help you progress on. But now at my age, when I do get hurt, I take it a lot more seriously, even little twinges in areas that seem like, oh, it's no big deal. Like it's just in my right calf, and who cares? And now I try to take the time to understand. And I also like how you point out how interconnected things are. And that's something that, I just learned more and more and more is that area that hurts may be related, that left calf may be my right hip moving in a way that's making my left calf, I think I remember that right, ask more than I should be asking it. And, I don't know if it'd be hard to explain on a podcast how to connect those things, but I just think it's important to recognize that it's not always right there.
Yeah. And I think, what you were saying about injuries and having some sort of, like say a knee, if you tear your meniscus, for instance, and structurally that thing does change. Because I think when I was talking to you about this, I talked about if it's structurally sound, and there's no instability and you've got good control and range. In those instances, I think, just use that joint and make it as strong as possible through as big a range as possible. If you do have a meniscus tear, that might inhibit you. And then it is about training smart around that thing for sure. But, the runner, it's not actually too hard to kind of connect the dots there. Let's say they come in with a painful right ankle, Achilles, let's say, and you ask them about everything else and you screen them and they've got this long-standing opposite hip strength or they can't lie on that side because it's sore and they've got a tendon problem with that hip. It's a reaction that they're never sorted. Then you look at their shoes and the side that has all the Achilles wear, the heel's gone on it and the midfoot is completely gone as well. And in the heel cup, that's all ragged, but the other side's fine. And these are things that the shoe shows it and then the body shows it. And these are nice connections when you find them.
Ooh, that's good. The looking at the shoe pattern so that makes me think that there's these hints that if you're attuned to your body and potentially even your gear, it sounds like that maybe you could even catch them before something catastrophic does happen. Anything that comes to mind that you see patterns or just any hints you can think of that you see in normal climbers that may suggest that they're moving in a way or have injured something previously that maybe they could catch it before it becomes catastrophic?
Well, shoulders seem to be one of the biggest injury points for climbers. And a lot of people develop interplay between their neck and their shoulder, or they'll feel that they'll develop like overload issues through to the elbow because they know that if they let their elbow extend, their shoulder becomes more vulnerable. So they keep this almost active seatbelt of tension to dampen down any stress into and around their shoulder. These are patterns we sometimes see. But climbing in particular is really hard because you know what it's like. You could just shift your weight to the left ever so slightly, load your leg a bit more and just hold with your arm rather than pull with it. And you know, do something with your hips to throw your hips in and pull a bit harder with your good side. It is harder than running, which is very, very symmetrical and repetitive. Like climbing, it's easier to carry issues through and they're harder to weed out in a lot of instances, I find. Does that make sense?
It does, but it's just, this is why I love climbing, is that every single move is different. And even on the day where the temperatures are different, or you're sore in one area, so you're putting more weight on your legs, and then it completely changes the movement. I will say that whole neck shoulder relation, you know, I'll see people lock off and their shoulder ends up by their ear, and then they come down and they rub their neck. And I'm like, if that's your default, is to shrug up, I know that's always a tip for me, is like, be careful with that, you know?
Yeah. It sounds like you watch people more than I do. It's great.
Well, the thing that always fascinated me is when I got into understanding anatomy and both injury rehab and then prehab, is that sometimes I would get hurt, and then the exercises that I did to restore health to that area actually made me stronger and made me understand why movement should be a certain way. Like, if we talk about like chicken winging, you end up kind of like doing internal rotation, and, you know, I mean, it just looks bad. It's like, why does it look bad? It's because what is strong is often, I don't want to make this a blanket statement, but is really locking your elbow down, really showing external rotation. You feel everything connected, and that's kind of how the body works. And so, yeah, I do watch it a lot because there's this interplay of performance along with it. You know, I want to be, because that's really what I want to do, Paul. I want to be strong. I want to be better.
Yeah. It sounds like you're doing a good job of it, but you're right. These are little tells if we see it on one side and not another. And usually low tell testing will kind of like dive into the mechanics of it a little bit more. And, you know, if it's a significant difference and there's pain associated with it, you kind of lean into that. But yeah, like you just described there, that's a really good thing, you know, seeing the elbow chicken winging. A lot of people wouldn't associate that with a weakness in external rotation, but it is your external rotators that kick that elbow back in and keep it underneath your hand when you're reaching up. So yeah, those sort of cues are really important to notice. That's a good one, that.
Yeah, but boy, is climbing so tricky, where you end up, you might have to do a what's it called, a gasto cling, and you're going to be in what looks like a chicken wing position, but then correct me if I'm wrong, I would still want to try to put some external rotation in the system, even if it's not visible. And I believe that would make it more stable. But it's funny because you're doing the shape that maybe looks terrible, but very complex. But I love it.
Yeah. I mean, the rotation in your shoulder and more important, your forearm, so important in terms of being able to put your power down through the hand, you know, and the strength in the wrist is so key to that as well. It's really interesting. I could definitely geek out with you about the importance of rotational control and range in the forearm, and then the shoulder. For me, it's in that order, for your hand to work properly and to be able to put your power down through certain parts of the hand, particularly the front two. That's really important. But, you know,
I don't know. No, say more. I want to hear more about that, because I think a lot about the shoulder, because when it comes to injuries, I've had the most in my shoulder. And so I think a lot about that rotation in the shoulder, but you're talking about the hands, wrist, and how that leads to the shoulder. So yeah, I'd love to start at that part of the chain rather than, you know, the shoulder.
Yeah. Okay. Well, like visually, if anyone can see it, the testing position for this would be simply putting your arms into your side and then making a fist. So imagine you're like holding a tray with your elbows into your side, but closing your hand, and then just turning your palms down and just looking at what your relative level of pronation is when you do that. Now, if we put the hand that's pronated into a crimp position, it's the pronation that allows you to keep that power through the front two. And if you've got a tangible difference in your pronation, if you've got a real deficit, let's say it's really different to the other side, then the only way you can get that is kicking your elbow out. That's the only way you're going to put your power through. And people who don't have that pronation, for whatever reason, they've been born with it, they've had an injury, and this is that cascade pattern we talked about, and they've got, say, 20 degrees less of that movement. When you ask them about their climbing, they say, I can only ever chisel with my index finger, because you're rolling into supination and your index is stopping at that chisel. And a lot of these guys have been told to do things like strengthen their index, work mono training. And that poor FDS tendon, the half crimp tendon, it's never going to be strong enough to overcome the deficit of pronation to put the power down. And so then you've got to figure out, well, can you improve your pronation? Or do we need to rethink how you're training your hands? Because if you're on a fingerboard and that one stiff wrist is turning that hand out all the time and you're fighting to half crimp on that index, you're going to cause yourself an issue there just by trying to make the software overcome hardware issues. So that's one good example, but there's so many like that in terms of strength and mechanics that affect how you deliver the power or control to the rock through specific fingers. And you just learn through lots and lots of pattern recognition and testing and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a hard lesson to learn, where you think that you want to just get stronger at this one point, which is, a structure that especially when we're talking about fingers, is not geared to handle as much as we already throw at. And then if you're moving incorrectly, you're asking more and more and more. The thing that makes me think of is how mobility and getting into correct positions really allow you to have the best force transfer. But something that I never understand how to balance is stretching and mobility and finding new ranges of motion and then not hurting yourself in that range of motion. And the reason why I bring this up is that I think when you're a kid, kids are fairly mobile already, and typically they're not that strong, actually. And when you get older and you're stronger, if you suddenly get into a range of motion for whatever reason that you haven't spent a lot of time in, I often find that I can injure myself. And so I always want to be careful with like aggressively stretching and then finding a new range of motion and then going 110% in it when I haven't really acclimated. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with it. Your tissues get less elastic as you get older. Let's say your body's used to moving a certain way, and then you see some jazzy video on YouTube, and it's a hack. It's do these 3 things for this. There's a real trap in thinking you can just force your body to be somewhere new and then know what to do when it gets there. And I think, I always try and avoid those kind of dead end questions about what are your top 3 something for something, because for every person that benefits from it, there'll be someone who takes that advice and tries it and their body doesn't like it. So I think kids have just got that ability to be exploring their body with far less effort, so they get stronger faster, especially if they're comp kids and they're being thrown into all these positions and developing strength on the fly. I'm quite cautious about improving my range of motion. I don't stretch as much as I should. I could definitely stretch more. But I notice in the World Cup circuit, the older comp climbers, they stretch so much before they get onto the wall. And no doubt they've done their due diligence and they've done all their S&C work and, their training, and they've peaked at the right time. So they can stretch to not suddenly find themselves in no man's land. But I definitely see them working harder to maintain their mobility in isolation. Their routines are very, very heavily strengthened through the range, then got on the wall.
I wonder if it's that key you said is maintain their mobility, so they're not all of a sudden finding a bunch of new range of motion that they've never experienced. Perhaps they've, again, maintaining that which they have. So if someone considers themselves inflexible and needing more mobility, how do you think one should integrate that? Should it be always off the wall and then just, try to just climb normally and hopefully it integrates it? Like, because there's always these ideas of passive stretching versus active stretching and usable range of motion. And if you go and sit in a hot sauna and spend 20 minutes trying to get into a pancake, you might do it, but be careful trying to do the splits in a stem on a dihedral. You might really hurt yourself,
Yeah, definitely. I think it's how used to being in that position is that joint. It's not used to it, then, you've got to think play the long game. If tendons take 3 months to truly show physiological adaptation that translates to performance, but muscles stretch or feel like they're stretching in like 2 or 3 sessions, what's going to go first? It's not going to be the muscle. I think it's as simple as that, really.
I'm with you where I haven't focused a ton on getting more range of motion as I like that maintaining. I was pretty bendy, and I gotta say that's one of the things I notice in high level comp climbing, but also you see in I would say even more so in sport climbing. Just if you can really get a good stem in, or just really reach for a high heel, oftentimes you can get rests or get more weight on your feet. And when we look at people with beautiful movement on the rock, they make that flexibility look effortless. And sometimes you don't even notice it. But what they're doing is they're getting a really high foot and doing it in a way where they can put weight on it. And so I think it's like this hidden thing that you often kids have in spades and some elite climbers do, but I don't know if it's as easy to get as just, hopping in the sauna and stretching a few times and then try and bring it on the wall.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely. The things that relax or improve with a quick fix like that aren't the things that you're going to rely on when you get to that end range and you're kind of loading in outer range. It'll be everything around what's changed quickly. But I am a fan of stretching. Like I said, I don't do it as much as I should. I don't know about you, but I find stretching gets demonized quite a lot. I think people like to create binary scenarios where they'll say stretching doesn't stop you getting injured, when a lot of people who might be interested in stretching aren't even asking that question. But because they've heard stretching doesn't you think, well, maybe there's no point stretching then, But there's a reason every World Cup climber stretches a lot. It's for that very reason that you've just described, to be able to get a limb somewhere and do something with it when it's there. So yeah, I do think stretching is underrated because every single World Cup climber does it a hell of a lot as part of their warm up in isolation. And that's not a coincidence, but you've got to understand where you're taking your body, what's hiding behind that new range. So if you've got a hip impingement, you probably don't want to force that hip into great deals of hip flexion. Your body will soon tell you if it's a good idea or not.
Yeah, I also want to echo that gymnasts stretch a lot before, after, in the middle of the day, and they're very flexible. I always think like I'm training at all times. So right now I'm training to stand. Like I do my podcast standing up. So I'm training to stand. And as you go through your day, especially as you get older, you just explore these ranges of motion less. And so when I think about stretching, it's not just like I'm thinking about like stretching the physical structure. It's just like, how often do I go into hip extension with my leg, like do the splits, even if I'm not doing the splits, just, or even go into like shoulder extension. Maybe those World Cup climbers do all the time, but most people are on board. How many times are your arms really behind you? And so I think about it as just making sure that I'm kind of almost training those positions, even if it's not with a bunch of weight, just exploring it. Just let my body remember, oh, you can move there.
I think that's so important, especially as you get older, because age changes, unless you've had a big injury, they're always insidious and slow. You don't notice the change. So there could be joint range of motion, or it could be muscle loss, sarcopenia, these sort of things that happen. If you're not familiar with how your body moves and feels, you've got more chance of not seeing these things happen. So I do think creating some sort of routine that, like you say, allows you to check in with fundamentals, I think that are really important to you. So you've got to really think about what's important to me with my climbing or just with moving through life. And then, how can I tune into those areas to allow me to have longevity? And I do think more and more people are doing that. And that's why I don't think we've seen peaks in climbing yet or ceilings yet, because people are starting to get ambitious for longer and they're thinking smart with it as well. And they're bringing in a ton of experience. Like you've got 30 years of climbing and you're still hungry and ambitious and you're refusing to let your body slow down. So, who knows where that's going to keep getting people. It's cool. It's really cool. It's the beauty of being involved in something new and evolving. We've got to remind ourselves we don't have answers to it. So yeah, just got to stay psyched, haven't you?
So you've also been climbing for a similar period. What has the physio realm looked like over those decades? Maybe actually, I feel like I just assumed everyone understood what you did, but in your practice, but maybe you can kind of give a little overview and then just how it's evolved over the last 30 years.
Well, actually, I've just started a new company, so I'm 5 months in, and I do 2 days a week from remote. and 3 days a week in person. And yeah, it's kind of, more of an international service, the remote stuff. And then, people who come and see me are people I've been working with for years, or climbers who want to come in for things that I can't offer them remotely. So things like, specific load cell testing, testing the fingers with various bits of kit, or imaging, if things just really don't make sense sometimes. But yeah, that's my typical physio week. And there's lots of other things I'm doing around that. But I think what's happened is the world of sports science and strength and conditioning and injury are starting to come closer together in terms of understanding how the body reacts to injury and how well it adapts to injury. And you find people leaning into loading things more comfortably, more confidently. We are finding that orthopedic medicine, particularly operations, being shown to have less efficacy than a wait and see approach in some cases. Sometimes I think in the past people have operated on things that probably would have got on absolutely fine without, and then, you're permanently changing your hardware. So I think just seeing how resilient the body is over the last decade, lots of people I've treated being told you'll never do da 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 again, and then they go on to do da 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 again with no problems, and no surgery. So I do think a lot of surgeons are downing their tools and becoming sports and exercise consultants, where they're trying to keep people healthy without operating. And that's an evolution in sports medicine. There's always going to be a place for surgery. And I think physios are getting better at strength and conditioning. I think strength and conditioning experts are getting brilliant at injury management and prevention, more importantly. I think we're just all learning from each other, to be honest. Yeah, I love it. I like to be as open as possible and collaborative, and I'm learning so much right now. It's very exciting.
I don't know if you get to talk to people in your role in other sports much, but how are climbers doing in their rates of injury, and are we way behind the times on our ability to get back to sport? Yeah. How's climbing stack up to maybe more established sports?
That's a really good question. I think climbing is its own little island in some ways, because you can always climb something else. If you're against the clock and your competition's a straight line, you haven't got much wriggle room, really. Um, But yeah, you can just change the goalpost so much. So oh God, I don't know. There's so little research in climbing, direct research, and we are extrapolating a lot from other sports. I do think that's working pretty well. And unfortunately, the practice is always ahead of the research, and the stats, like, it takes you 5 to 10 years to see research integrating into practice. And if our sport doesn't have much established research already, then a lot of the time we're doing what we can have, putting our best foot forwards. But I do think we've got to acknowledge the fact that, like I said earlier, it's the human body's resilience to improve that in a lot of cases see people getting better. And you're just trying to keep them as strong as possible around the problem whilst it settles in a lot of cases. And that, I think 10 years ago, physios with ego would have a problem with that. But I think that's just reality. It's celebration of human resilience, really. That's what we're seeing a lot of, people overcoming regardless of how bad things get.
Yeah, it blew me away when you zoomed in a bit on my little finger thing. And it just struck me that there's so many different kinds of injuries that can happen to the fingers, hands, and wrists. And I was talking to Dan Varian, who I know you're friends with, and he made that little comment about just how that's where climbers are the best in the world. The kind of, if you look at our hands and up, but then we spend so much time on shoulders. And of course we do. Of course. I mean, I don't want to say that the shoulders of those top climbers are anything but incredibly strong, but it strikes me as that the hand is maybe the most complex structure in the body. I mean, it's got to be the most dexterous, cause that's kind of what we talk about when we talk about dexterity. And so, as you started breaking down some of the stuff going on with me, it just struck me as, wow, there must be more work that can be done. And in the next 10 years, we're going to have better diagnosis, rehab, maybe even getting stronger too.
I'm definitely seeing issues that any hand therapist listening to this would see and immediately go, that we're not picking up in climbing medicine, climbing specialist physios. Perhaps we haven't had that grounding in the hand therapy world. I do think there's some work to do there. But yeah, that sort of thing takes time and education. And again, it's just seeing it filter in I think you'll get more passing of that information through climbers being told this is that problem and then passing it on to other people. I think that's as powerful. Climbers are just so quick to pick up on these things, and then, they're meticulous, aren't they? If you had an injury, you'd notice it in someone else. And I think that sort of thing filters through quite well.
Yeah, I also think that with these new holds that we see, because literally we make holds out of fiberglass and plastic and everything, there's probably injuries that are occurring now that didn't occur often before. I remember I got a weird one where I was kind of like a duckbill, grabbing something like a duckbill.
A lobster pinch.
Yeah, I hurt something. This is years and years ago. I hurt something, but it was definitely not like you popped your pulley because you were crimping on a thing as hard as you could. Because I didn't realize, like, my finger hurts, but I couldn't figure out for the longest time how I had hurt it, because it's just, that's not something you do. But I was on some weird comp problem thing. And we're exploring all sorts of different grips, and injuries will result.
Yeah. I think what you've said there is really interesting, because if you numbered the knuckles, let's say your punching knuckle, your hand knuckles, knuckle 1, then 2 and 3, your finger knuckles. I think we're getting better at understanding the mechanics of knuckles 2 and 3. So, your half crimp and drag grips. But when you just described that lobster pinch there, you're really into the intrinsics of the hand. And their anatomy is really interesting, really complicated in some ways. It goes from the palm side to the back of the knuckles, 2 and 3, the ends of your fingers. And there's so much interplay between pain from the hand coming to the knuckles. And I do think that's probably an area to upskill in as well. And again, any hand therapist would just be so hot on that, because they see that all day, every day, and they could translate that quickly into sport. They probably couldn't get the hand ready for the demands of sport from the finger knuckles, where Dan was talking about climbers being world class. I did like that. It made sense. And I was immediately thinking, is that right? Is there any other sport where, that's more world class in terms of strength than climbers from the 2 digits of the fingers up? And I just really can't think of anyone.
I'm trying to think. So I definitely maybe more dexterous on those instruments of musicians, but they don't have to hang from their fingertips. It's still mind blowing. So, on that note of us being elite in the hands, you spend your time around a ton of elite climbers, and I'm just curious, kind of like, what's the thread that connects them? What makes elite climbers elite versus just also run guys like me?
I don't know. I think it's a lot of parallels in how you think and how they think. It's an interesting question. I would say that besides the obvious about being really focused and disciplined, dedicated to the sport, I would say one thing that makes in climbing elite guys elite is that they are all very individual, which makes that a really difficult question to answer. They're all very, very different. If you look at just the GB team, they're all such different characters, such different personality types. Yeah, sure, they turn up and they do the work, but the way they interpret the movement, the way they feel about their climbing, what's important to them is all really different. And when they're injured, that personality difference plays out as well. So I could answer that more on the kind of injury side of things. But yeah, the main thing is they're all fiercely independent, and you've got to get to know each one of them in order to be able to actually help them and work with them. That's the biggest challenge, I'd say.
Quick break while I tell you about today's sponsor. You. That's right, you. Thank you to all the patrons who help make this show possible. Join them so you can get episodes early before anyone else, and those episodes are ad-free. As a patron, you also get to submit questions for upcoming guests. The answers to those questions are only available to patrons. Follow the link in the show notes to join now. You also get access to a private Discord where you'll find me and other people who want to go from good to great. Okay, back to the pod. That's just fascinating that the best are all very different. Like that's an interesting thread, that there isn't a thread, and that always makes me think of this concept that in some ways you're just trying to deeply express yourself physically, personality wise too, but just, if they're world class at something, that's because they let it show. They weren't always trying to pick up all of their weaknesses, but if they're going to be world class at whatever it is, that it really is the best example of them, and that they're different. So you're like, there is no threat. It's that they're all different. Well, maybe we can talk about what it's like when the best of the best get injured, how their rehab may or may not be different, and what their return to sport looks like.
Yeah, I would say that just on that note of like, what, next, I would say that they're all very intrinsically motivated, I would say. So, they can show up and they can fail objectively, and they can learn in the moment without emotion. I think they do that really, really well. Obviously, when it comes to performing under the lights, the emotions will come out, but the months or years of training where they have managed to put that to one side and just being like a real dog with a bone and tenacious and, disciplined when they're not feeling motivated. These are all patterns or common threads I see in the guys that I work with who are top at anything really. It's a hard thing to develop, and you've got to really care about the thing to invest that much time and energy into it. But equally, you've got to step away from caring in order to see things clearly, which can be really difficult when your life is that thing. So I do think that's an amazing line that they walk. But when they are injured, it can be really tricky to get them back up to that level as well. All their self-worth and identity is locked up in that thing. So
whenever I talk about being injured, it's so devastating for me. And I have a lot of other things in my life that keep me sane. And then I try to act like it's no big deal, but somehow it just really deeply emotionally affects you. And I would imagine it's tenfold when it's literally your whole life and your career. But yeah, I'm curious, do they get any special massages that makes them all of a sudden get better twice as fast, or do they recover just as slowly and annoyingly as the rest of us?
yeah, I don't think there's any shortcuts at all, especially if it's a proper injury. It's just hard work. And what you've got to do is change the goalposts around them so that they don't feel that pressure. Often when you're working with elite athletes, it's the coach that you have the tough conversations with. Because a top athlete will trust their coach implicitly. I've seen it when they're in pain or they've got niggles or their backs to the wall. The coach quite often is either nurturing or really quite dismissive. And you sometimes have to pull yourself back, especially as a physio where you know what they're going through. And you watch the coach, and the coach knows full well everything I know, but they also know that that person's got it in them in that moment to make the call to keep climbing or, to push on. And that's where a really good coach will excel, and they'll walk that line. It's a hard one. I don't think I could be a coach like that. But if it's obviously not good, you have to have a tough conversation with the coach. And I think 10% of what you talk to the coach about gets relayed to the athlete. You make sure that the scene is clear, the sponsors know about it, all the comms is out there, and then the athlete doesn't need to worry about anything but getting back to the dance. And that's one luxury that they'll have, although it won't feel like a luxury at the time, but it makes a huge difference to giving them the space and time and energy to not worry about all that stuff and just focus on doing the basics that we would all need to do.
That athlete coach relationship, so clutch, so important.
Oh, so important. It's a beautiful thing to watch when it goes right. Occasionally it goes wrong, and that's also interesting. You see that sometimes in things like tennis where, people are just shouting at their coach. And yeah.
So not on the injury idea, but on this idea of each elite athlete being unique, when you do work with them, do you notice specific muscles or movement patterns that really set each one apart? And I'm thinking along the lines of Dan Varian, where he talked about, like, he's worked with Aiden Roberts a lot, and he really has a emphasis on kind of the back to the pinky and ring finger, and just how that seemed to also shape his body. And this is maybe more movement pattern than just thinking about the muscles.
Yeah, I think every athlete's different like that. I think some athletes are just really good at fighting. So it's like nothing's that special, and they're really in the trenches. They just don't give up, and they find a way, and they're shaking and fighting, and most people would have given up, but they stay on and they get the buzzer beater because they're so tenacious. And that's like an intangible. I really think that's not physical, that's mental, and they've just got that ability to find a way. And I think that's as impressive, if not more than, a physical attribute that gives you a super strength. Like Toby's really good at fighting on the sustained routes, and he can just keep on going in a way that makes him stand out quite a lot. And he's also very good when his arms are in ridiculously contorted positions. He's got an ability to sort of reel it in when it looks like his shoulder's in a position that there's very little control. That's a skill of his. And you kind of work with those things by maintaining the range of motion in these extremes of range. These are things that I know if there's not that restriction in ISO, then he's got more chance of getting his arm in that position or his elbow, chicken wing in a crazy position when he's out there and use it, because I know he's strong enough. So there are sort of these patterns you see in people that you think, well, how can I contribute to this to maintain the health rather than just wait for something to go wrong?
Sometimes when I see those athletes, Toby is one of them, and I see them make these shoulder positions. And because of my shoulder injuries and my understanding, my poor understanding, but my somewhat understanding of anatomy, I go, oh no, don't do that. And then they're just fine. And it just blows me away.
Yeah, exactly. I do that as well. My shoulders they hurt sometimes watching people do things, or find myself just holding my breath. I'm always putting my mind in that body and imagining what my body would feel like. And it definitely wouldn't feel or look as good as theirs do.
Paul, why is the UK scene so freaking strong right now? Because you said Toby Roberts won the Olympic gold medal. Aiden, I can keep going down the list. I don't know. You're there. Why is the UK scene so freaking strong right now?
There are standouts, aren't there? Like Will's a good one, a good example. Just casually just going around, getting stuff done in his own kind of matter of fact, quite humble way. And I think, we're not seeing that much of Aiden at the moment, because I think he's kind of just getting his head down and getting on with doing what he likes doing. And I just think there's something about that pure, intrinsically motivated person. And, there are just so many of those in every country just going off and having it. I'm lucky. I do work with quite a lot of really motivated, humble people. And I think they just don't think it's as big a deal as everyone watching them might think it is. Obviously, they feel incredibly fulfilled when they do something really difficult, but the process that gets them there, it's quite a humble, kind of matter-of-fact process, very objective. Not good conditions today, can't do it. Extend the trip because I'm nearly there, or I'm nowhere near, I'm going to come home and train a bit at home, and then I'm going to go back out when it's a bit better. It's just that kind of matter-of-fact, slightly devoid of the emotion that allows you to be consistent at things. So my grandfather was like that. He was amazing. He was strong until he was 95. He's still strong now, but just got on with things every day and didn't think it was a big deal. And I do think there's something to be said for that, I think.
That's this, have you ever heard this term, the messy middle? We often
no.
It's like let's say you start a new sport and, there's like some rocky montage of you, lifting weights and doing hangboard. And then you fast forward to the Olympic gold. But the middle, it's the kind of showing up, but then also finding joy in the showing up. I think that, when you said that, not that they don't realize the level that they're at, but that they're just climbing, because that's how it is from day 2 to the Olympic gold. And then after it too, right? Like you keep going. And I have a hunch. I think Aiden's still out there doing amazing things and keeping on. I don't think it's the last we've seen of him. Yeah.
No, definitely not. No. But I think climbing's for him now for a bit, probably something like that is going on there. But I think the mindset is probably what connects anyone who just keeps excelling. You see it on the World Cup circuit. You'll see it at your local wall. There'll be someone who's just a beast and they're just always there, always getting on with it, just that pure motivation, I think is special, isn't it?
The reason why I asked is because everyone else or all my friends are just, you named a couple of the big names. I can keep on going about all the other amazing names that are in the UK climbing really hard in the comp scene, outdoors, pick your choice. And there's this term, I'm going to throw another term at you, called the scenius. Instead of genius, it's a scenius. And the idea is that oftentimes when you get a crew together, it's not just one lone person that, is toiling in their basement, I don't know, figuring out some amazing math problem. It's often they're at a coffee shop with their friends and they're talking about math for the last 10 years and that there's some collective effort. And it's something I often encourage people. I mean, you could say this about anything in life. It's like, oh, you want to get stronger in climbing? Go climb with strong climbers. Don't worry. Like somehow it'll work. Like, I don't know why, but there's some osmosis there that they will just bring you up. And so I was just wondering if, I don't know if that seems to be going on over there. Just congrats on the amazing crop of climbers.
It's a lot of it's traveling. Like you talk about osmosis, the duo you never knew you needed is Dave Graham and Will Bosey. Talk about a power duo, those two are, and amazing, absolutely amazing. Yeah, I just love it when you get collaboration like that. Amazing sharing of skills, and good things happen when those two climb together. So yeah, watch this space on that stuff.
Climbing's done amazing things the last 5 years, and I feel like the next 5 years are just as exciting. And yeah, on this idea of the comp climbing scene, because I feel like we've been naming some of the, outdoor climbing and the things that's going on there, but comp climbing has just done extremely well. I mean, we're in the Olympics now, which is exciting. And I love the Olympics. Paul, I don't know. The Olympics somehow, maybe it's my gymnastics background. I just have like some thing about it. And something that we're seeing in bouldering is that it's evolved quickly. If you just went back 10 years, you'd see new moves, new holds. And that's because that's what setters do. They're like, surprise, like you've never done this before. And that's kind of the game that they're playing, is a little cat and mouse game. And I'm wondering how you help these athletes prepare or think about not getting injured when literally they have no idea what's coming. It's very different when you say, hey, there's going to be a 10 millimeter crimp. Like, well, let's expose ourselves to 10 millimeter crimps in a graded way, and you're less likely to get hurt. But the shoulder positions, like you're talking about with Toby, like who knows what's coming, and any insight into how to prepare athletes to hopefully not get injured in these ever changing, dynamic, strange positions they're finding themselves in?
Yeah, definitely. What we're seeing a lot of now is, shoulder injuries, like I say, are quite common. And it's interesting, there's interplay between the sexes. So, more shoulder injuries generally in females, and more finger injuries in males. It's certainly in the sort of recreational indoor climbing scene. And that's because, in World Cups, the setters are setting to take into account the slightly shorter ape index of women. Whereas if we're at a wall and I'm with my friend, who's a woman and she's trying to climb, she can't make that span. So it's not being adjusted for her ape index. So she's exposing her shoulder to more open positions where she's got less control. And, for those reasons, you've got to really think about your height, the block that you're on, how it feels when you are fully spanned, how you can translate that feeling of vulnerability or weakness into something off the wall to explore that and develop it. Especially if you've got these repeated moves you just can't do. Oh, I'm not very good at that. Well, why aren't you very good at that? It'll be because the holds that the person who owns the walls bought have been developed by setters to expose some sort of weakness in you. And are you not good at it? Or is your brain refusing to see the obvious, answer to the problem? And it's just, you need to go and do a bit of work on it, It's amazing, like you say, like climbers have got so strong that, crimps just that aren't splitting the pack. They can all still bust a move. They've all got ridiculously strong fingers, haven't they? But now we just need no techs, or we need flying through the air with coordination, or we need holds that are really rounded so that your limbs get put into positions where they're in full outer range and then they're fully rotated. And setters are amazing. They're amazing at finding positions the body is not good at being in. It's incredible, really. Route setting has just become this really special art, and it's not slowing down. Like, we're always seeing new blocks, so you're always having to play catch up. But I think if you listen to your body, you'll definitely get insight through repetitive failure. I think landing's a big one as well. Like it's these coordination blocks. You've got to land and fall at least, if it's a hard block, at least 10 times to figure it out. In gymnastics, when gymnasts land, they take 7 to, I think it's 18 times body weight through their ankle, knees and hips. I think in order to be able to fail that many times, you have to think, well, are my legs strong enough to fail 10 times? repeatedly on these blocks? Do I need to do a bit of work on my ground reaction, my strength? How heavy do I lift? How much do I isolate my leg strength? And these things are trained in sports where there's research and people do lots of falling, but people are falling with relatively new sets and the body's just not ready for it. So I would say ape index is a big one. And especially for women, I'd say landing strategies is really important. Strength in your lower limb. I think not trying to be strong in the fingers too quickly is so important. I think for life, I would say, if you and I suddenly started upping our finger game, we'd both get problems. But if someone saw us on the board, they'd think, wow, their fingers are so strong. But we're all, a few bad training sessions away from making something narky if we're not careful about it. So I do think you need to walk the line and be smart with it.
I'd never even thought of the landing component. I used to jump down from the top of the walls with glee. You send
Yeah.
and just, stomp the ground but having those risky high coordination moves and then taking those falls, and they can be weird. And like one of the tricks to doing these coordination moves is commitment. Like, so then you really don't know how you're going to fall. And it's something that they actually didn't teach us a lot about landing in gymnastics. And something I've heard is really good in ballet for the body and strength is they have a huge emphasis on landing because you want to be quiet. You want to my daughter's in ballet. That's why it's top of mind.
Okay.
Just made it into the peanut cracker. She's a mouse. Big deal. I'll let her know that I shouted her out. But I could see that being a way bigger deal than I even thought of in these. You have to fall again and again in weird positions. And so, yeah, is leg strength and lower limb resistant or lower limb, what's the word I'm looking for? Ability not to get hurt. There's a better word for that.
Resilience.
Resilience. Is that becoming a greater part of the sport?
Oh, for sure. I think what we've seen is lots of good athletes moving over to the coordination side of things with loads and loads of K-tape around their knees, struggling to land properly, falling backwards. I mean, most of the comp climbers fall backwards. So they land on their heels when they break fall. They don't save their energy through the front of their feet. They just crumple and fall backwards because they're doing it so much. There's no way that their joints can basically save the fall every time. And so I think what we're seeing now is people being proactive and thinking, well, other sports can't do that. They can't fall onto their butt. Gymnasts, they have to land and they have to make it look pretty. So what do we do to give them resilience there? Well, we train 4 days a week on plyometrics and fundamental strength. We do tempo type strengthening. So, you literally get a metronome, duh, 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 and you have to keep tempo. Proper strength, requires you to move, not using speed to cheat yourself through weaknesses. This type of approach exposes problems that you need the fundamental control in before you start making it look pretty and move quickly and things like that. So you might be good at jumping between holds, but if you can't land more than 10 times without getting knee pain, something's going on in that chain there. And that's going to kind of be something that you probably would carry through. We talked about this kind of bringing problems through your later years. If you do want to keep doing corner blocks and you can't land because you're weak, then you're probably not going to be able to learn as well. And you've probably not got a long life of doing corner blocks, It's that sort of thinking big picture.
How do you deal with these no techs or dual techs or whatever it's called, the lower friction things? And the reason why I bring it up is I'm scared of them because I'm scared of my foot popping unexpectedly when I'm in a bad position. And just that's an area that has become really prevalent in comp climbing. And it scares me, man. I don't want to have like sudden movements when I'm in extreme ranges of motion.
Yeah, like a no text jib that you need to stand on.
Exactly.
You need to sort of hop onto and then, balance on one leg. Yeah. The fact it can be done means that you're going to see more and more of it. And if this splits the pack, you're seeing them already in World Cups all the time. That's like just an established thing, isn't it? I hate them personally because I don't like feeling really insecure, and I could probably do with working on my footwork and my balance a lot more in order to learn to love them. That's a good example of me coming up against something and just going, I don't like that sort of thing. But the truth is, I just don't want to put the time into training for it. Because I'm old and grumpy. I just want to do both problems. Our younger climbers, the comp climbers, they have to do it. And so you got to think, well, what fundamentals do you need to build up for them to feel confident to lean into that and get better at it.
Well, and my concern with them is not just that skill ability, but the exposure that I think it's riskier. I find that, maybe I'm in a weird mantly position and I'm putting all my weight on something and that pops. I'm more likely to hurt my shoulder when I'm, in an awkward position. And just basically, even though I know you don't want to say something like, what's your top 3 exercises for shoulders? But it's like, if you're going to be in these crazy ranges of motion and doing it in kind of times where you could pop, I say pop, like your foot might pop and you might load, like, how do you help them prepare their shoulders for, these extreme ranges of motion?
Yeah. I mean, every athlete's different. Some athletes don't want to be screened like this, but some athletes love being thoroughly screened, looking at every single joint, strength, range of motion, end feels, rate of force development, then compound movements, measuring things down to like individual finger strength. So if in the future there was ever a problem with a nerve or with an injury, you'd know basically where they're at compared to their pre-season screening. And I do that. It takes 90 minutes if you want to do it really efficiently to screen an entire body. And then you can find out these areas and you can say, well, that's not strong enough, or, this leg's got this, this leg's got this. It's the difference is greater than 30%. And if you're fine if you're traveling to the left, but if you're traveling to the right, you might come across without the ankle range of motions down by 5 centimeters. It's these fundamentals that do matter. So I do like to screen people really thoroughly. Some people just don't enjoy it, and that's fine. But you usually find some useful stuff. And you can translate that restriction to why they can't stand on a volume properly, then they'll suddenly be more interested.
So I definitely have impressive discrepancies. Even though I haven't gone through the 90-minute assessment, I'm sure that I have things that are egregiously bad. And I'm curious if that is a common occurrence on elite athletes, or are they typically just kind of perfect?
No, they're not. They're far from it. There's loads of asymmetries. And I think sometimes the balance is not making them neurotic about these things, because imbalances are normal. But if it's an imbalance greater than a certain amount of percentage compared to the other side, and those restrictions are what route setters are going to look for to split the pack, you have to see how much you can lean into them and improve them. And so it's just being proactive before, that they find themselves in that position. And that's all you can do, because the setting will dictate how they're moving, and the setting's always changing. So you have to just put your best foot forwards and think, how do we keep them as mobile and resilient as possible? And then it's just anyone's guess as to what they're going to actually be tested on. And like you say, that's still evolving. It's the beauty and the challenge of being in a sport that doesn't know what it is yet, but still figuring it out, aren't we?
Well, this is why I kind of started out by potentially saying that the reason why we're seeing such a young age in comp climbing is due to the quick evolutions. And it was a lot. I competed last in nationals, maybe 2014 or something like that.
Oh, cool.
And yeah. I don't think there was any paddle dyno, any kind of, run and jump. It was just, there was slab climbing. There was steeper like it was very, it's like, ooh, here's a pinch, very
yeah.
run of the mill. And so this is where it's not clear if being younger is because the body is the best at climbing when you're younger, or if it's just the evolution of the sport and that whole being exposed to these movements when you're younger and thus being able to adopt these new movement patterns when you're young. So let's talk more about being older and hopefully be able to climb at a high level as you age. What do you think are some of the things that just textbook will diminish with age, and then maybe how we can help slow down that aging process in those movements or power generation, whatever the case may be?
Yeah, I think the first thing about that is you've got to really want to have longevity in order to put the time in enough to keep doing what you love. So I think, in terms of figuring that stuff out, if someone's listening to this and they want to get something from it, I would recommend that they really appreciate their body now for what it can do. Like, just really garner an appreciation for everything you can do. and celebrate it. And if you care that much, you're more likely to want to look after it. That's like the same for anything. If you like your car, you're going to look after it. If you like your board, you're going to look after that thing. And I think I would sort of encourage people to think about their bodies a bit more like that. What is it about how you move that you really like? My sort of version of that is very fundamental. I literally celebrate the fact I can walk and I don't feel any pressure in my joints. I don't feel my feet, my knees or my hips. I feel like I'm on a cloud. And I know that's not always going to feel like that. There'll be a time where my body will feel every step. But I know when it does come to that point, I'll have celebrated every single time I've walked and felt light and limber. And I'm going to do my best to sustain that. So for me, being able to walk smoothly like that is kind of like my little Everest, if I'm being honest. But I'd encourage other people to be more ambitious than that. And the things that, to answer the question, people lose their joint range of motion and muscle mass and strength as they get older. It's just a fact. Natasha Barnes is really big on this muscle loss and lifting heavy. And some people might think I don't need to lift that heavy, but the muscle loss side of things is true. As you age, you do lose that. And so you need to think, well, how do I develop training routines to try and mitigate that? Range of motion is another one. It creeps up on you slowly. You lose your range slowly. So you've got to think, well, what do I want to use my range for? What's important to me? Do I live in a place where there's loads of slabs? You're going to need to be able to get your knee really high. You're going to need to probably sit down and squat on your heels. You're going to need stable hips to be able to stand on that leg to lift the other one high. That's such a hidden strength that people don't think about when they watch someone get their foot up. It's the standing leg that's doing all the work. The other leg's just lifting up. So think about what it is that you celebrate about how you move. And I think it's Peter Attia. He talks about the what's he call it, centenarian decathlon.
Yes, great reference there. Yeah,
it's a great reference because he's saying choose 10 things that you want to still be able to do when you're 100. And I would sort of reframe that and say, as a climber, choose 5 things that you really still want to do in 10 years. Think about what movements those things involve. And think about how you could just program that into some sort of warm up because, people don't like doing these exercises. They're boring. But if you do them as part of a routine and you're checking in with them all the time, you're less likely to see these issues slowly creeping in. So I would say that process is really individualized and it depends a lot on what you celebrate about your body, what brings you joy in how you move, and how can you break that down into things that you can check in with regularly. And then that's why I think, just really appreciating what you've got is the important starting point because it gives you a frame of reference. Does that make sense?
Yes, Paul. I'm gonna say it back to you because I think it's really cool. It's this idea of appreciating what you have, which I think is very important because then you'll take care of it. And that also helps you just recognize it. And then once you recognize what you want to do and want to be able to do, then you can kind of break it down into its constituent components and then practice those things and do them to the best of your ability regularly so that they don't just go away out of nowhere. It's like, oh, I, really like Gaston or slab climbing or getting a high foot. And if you don't do that for 5 years because of whatever reason, and all of a sudden you try to do it, it just might not be there anymore.
Yeah. And I would say that I'm being a little bit facetious when I say about the cloud walking and that's my Everest. I actually really want to be able to hit hard board problems and I want to be able to, bust a move still. That's my thing when I've got a big open span position. And to do that, I know I've got to keep my shoulders mobile. They've got to be strong when they get there and they've got to be able to react quickly. And so I have a routine where I look at taking a weight and letting it move overhead. And I try and carry as much weight as possible. So I know my muscles can coordinate my shoulder blade and my arm to get to the floor. I want to be able to do single arm shrugs. I want to, on a good day, be able to do 1 arm pull-ups. And I want to be able to jump and catch an edge with a bend in my elbow and not lose the tension. So, speaking honestly, these are things that I celebrate and are really important to me in my climbing. And that's why I've broken it down in that way.
I just like the idea of taking the time to break it down. This is, again, why it shows you that even if performance is one of your main goals, just understanding how and why the body moves is so important. So then you can kind of take that step back and say, what's important to me? How might I train this?
Yeah, I think it's starting with what's important to you. I think that sometimes gets missed when people give advice on what they think is best. as opposed to getting people to think for themselves, what do I actually want to get? Because then that intrinsic motivation kicks in. If you can facilitate that and teach someone how to, sustain that, that's brilliant, and that's got legs and it's likely to last. Otherwise, it's more likely to be a fad, something you try for a few weeks and then just ditch it because you don't really know why you're doing it. It just seems like a good idea at the time,
I gotta ask you a little bit more about this muscle loss and wasting sarcopenia as you get older, because something that I've noticed in myself and in a lot of my friends around here who have been kind of lifelong athletes, and then as they get older, they actually often, due to kids, they often are more regimented and healthy, where they are eating more protein, getting better sleep, probably drinking less. And I've actually seen a lot of my friends, and me included, kind of like steadily gain more muscle into their 40s and some even their early 50s. And I just found that interesting. It's like,
I have.
Yeah, you have too? Okay.
I have. Yeah, I have for sure. Yeah, because I now rest properly and I train really hard when I've got the energy for it. And I'm smart with what I eat. I don't sleep enough, but I fuel really well. And, these things that you start paying attention to more. Do you ever think, I wish I could go back 10 or 20 years and just show myself these little things that make a big difference? Because sometimes I do, but then other times I think, well, it was cool just not knowing and just having fun and being in the moment and trying to make it happen and enjoying the process, which I think ultimately is all that matters,
Whenever I think about young Josh or future Josh, whatever like color I paint that, whether it's a positive or negative, I always just think that says everything about how I feel today. And so whenever things are going well for me, I look back, I'm like, wow, that was a great journey you were on. And that's what led you here. And the future looks bright. And if it's the opposite, I always say, maybe you need to do better today, because if, the future looks bleak and you think you should have done something different before, it probably says more about just your daily mood than it does about the reality.
100%. 100%. Yeah, absolutely. You can only take care of yourself today, can't you? But yeah, like you, I've definitely noticed that stuff, and it's pretty cool. Like, it is really cool to still feel strong and to still feel like you're achieving something that makes you, well, the juice is worth the squeeze still. Like, I'm still 100% psyched for all this. So there's still first ascents to do on Portland. Not that, it's a very exotic place to climb. It's full of old school crimps, but I love it. And we're still finding new lines to do. And the psych's very much still there.
Before we totally go off the being older and muscle mass stuff, something that I've thought about, and I want to kind of check it with someone like you, where I do want to keep muscle mass as I get older, of course. But when I think about it, I kind of think about maybe it's more of a proxy for ability. Like, let's say quad muscles or leg muscles are important. But I guess what I would want is I want to be able to do a pistol or a heavy squat, or a relatively heavy squat, we'll say. And that as long as those movements feel strong and good, that I think of muscle as being a proxy for that rather than the thing itself. Am I right thinking that way?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Like, you mean like you want functional strengths?
What I mean is if I can continue to do a pistol and everything into my next decade, that even if I lose a ton of, or a bit of muscle, that like I should focus on what my muscles do rather than the muscle size. And that if I just did something to pump my legs up, that may not accomplish what I'm really looking for as I age, which is basically like strength and lowering my injury risk.
Yeah, I would say if that is your motivation there, I would say it's a very pure motivation, and one you're more likely to sustain over how good do I look in a mirror,
The reason why I ask is that I know that I could squat more and I could get bigger and bigger legs, and it might be like, oh, then in my next decade, if I lose 5% of that muscle, I'll still have more. But I just feel like there has to be some point where I'm like, okay, like my centenarian climbing decathlon is to, be able to pistol up a slab, and have that ability. And I need to like understand what the goal is versus just continuing to head down this path of like more muscle mass because it's going to lessen. And there's something that's like, why is the muscle mass important? And I thought it was because of the movement.
Absolutely. I think that's the good example of getting a bit too dogmatic and just purely making it about one facet. And that's why having lots of different things that you're trying to train for and doing the thing will help you constantly check in with that. Yeah, you're right. You can get a bit too drunk on just getting good at one thing and thinking that's going to just carry you through. It's hard work. It's hard work being ambitious. It takes a lot of energy and effort, and the goalposts are going to move. But if you're constantly checking in with your body, you've got far less chance of having the rug pulled from under your feet and suddenly finding yourself in a position that's hard to come back from. You just got to be motivated and on it and listening to your body. And fortunately, I don't think climbing's going to stop evolving. So if you keep your eyes open, you're going to constantly have that kind of frame of reference showing you where you're at. So yeah, I think we're in a good spot for not being able to get complacent or go down the wrong avenue and end up at a dead end.
Well, at least the rocks aren't evolving. And so I can sit here and pick my projects that I'd like to still be able to do midnight lightning when I'm, 65. That's a tall order because it's a pretty tall boulder, by the way. Okay. Well, Paul, I want to ask you the question I ask everyone, although boy, have you hinted at it a bunch and given some good advice anyways. And that's, Paul, how do you go from good to great?
Yeah, I think the thing that's kind of gone through this thread is mindset. I think mindset is absolutely everything. It's the one thing that you can be just as plastic with in your 80s as you can when you're 18. So, you've got the ability to think, what motivates me? How do I maintain motivation? Because I think without that, you're not going to be able to put the necessary work into to go from good to great. I think Toby's a good example of this. Hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but in June, he was really struggling with pressure and expectation. And after winning the games at 19, he was talking about his post at being 20 and not having a plan for this and feeling really weighed down by the expectation. And I think he did a post and then he placed 51st, which is his lowest result in 2 years in Bern. And then less than 10 days later, he won gold after this big post of, how he was feeling. And there's no way physically anything changed in those 9 days. But mentally, he really figured out what it was that was stopping him from being able to climb freely and enjoy the moment. And I think, we're not all Toby, but mentally we've got that ability to think about what motivates us. And I don't know if anyone is listening to this resonates, but how often are you going to the climbing wall and you're hyper aware of everyone watching you, or not that, but you're wondering what people are thinking about your movement at that moment in time. And essentially you're climbing through the eyes of other people, exactly like what was weighing Toby down. And if that resonates for you, ask yourself why that's happening in your head. Like, what is it that's making you sort of almost subdue your ability to move freely and be in the moment? And if you can figure that out and not climb through the eyes of other people and just really enjoy the moment for what it is, problem solve, find kind of a lot of satisfaction in failure because you're learning every time with microbeta and then you do it. I think that for me is like what goes from good to great, because anyone can do it. It's the same challenge for anyone, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm just chuckling because I always find it so interesting that you just want to climb your best in this moment. You pull on and just be there and give it all you have. And somehow that's one of the hardest things to do. And I find that forever fascinating that, like you said, Toby had such a different result in 10 days. It's unlikely that much changed physically. And yet it was a wildly different result. And, how do we control that? How do you control your body and your mind to just allow yourself to give whatever you have in that moment? And it sounds so simple. You're climbing, just climb, go for it. And that's so hard to actually do consistently.
Just that expectation, and whether or not it's necessary to put that level of expectation on your shoulders, why you're putting it on there, and the downsides to having it there in terms of being objective when you fail. If you come down with loads of mental adrenaline, you're not learning in that moment. You won't notice what didn't go right. And so if you can just tune that out and climb for yourself in that very moment and learn through failure and enjoy that process, I honestly think that is good to great for me.
Wow. Well, good job, Toby, especially tackling this stuff at 19 too. I don't envy that. Well, it's a lifetime pursuit that we're on, trying to get better at that. And yeah, that was a great answer, Paul. Paul, I'm gonna switch us over to a couple of more tactical Patreon questions that I got that actually we could have dovetailed into them earlier. And so I think they'll really resonate. If you want to hear that Q&A and other extra behind the scenes content from this episode and others, head over to patreon.com/testpiece to sign up now. Patrons also get their episodes early and ad-free. There's hours and hours of bonus content there to help you on your own path of going from good to great. Still not sure? There's a free 7-day trial for you to check it out. And to help the show grow, please share this episode with someone who would love it. Okay, see you next week.